Black CEO gets kicked out of his own five-star hotel. 15 minutes later, he fires his entire staff. In the golden glow of the Grandmont's entrance, two versions of the same man are about to collide in a confrontation that will expose the hollow promises of corporate diversity training and reveal how quickly privilege can transform prejudice into politeness. Marcus Sterling's decision to inspect his own luxury hotel without the armor of obvious wealth becomes a devastating education in how discrimination operates beneath professional surfaces, turning doormen into gatekeepers and security into enforcers of unspoken hierarchies. Sometimes the most profound revelations about character, both personal and institutional, emerge not from grand gestures, but from simple moments when power temporarily steps aside to experience the world as it truly exists for those deemed unworthy of basic respect. Marcus Sterling stepped out of his modest rental sedan in front of the Grandmont, the crown jewel of his luxury hotel empire worth $3 billion. At 39, he had built his hospitality business from a single property into an international chain of premium establishments. Yet tonight he chose to arrive without fanfare, designer suits, or the obvious markers of wealth that typically preceded his visits. His decision to conduct surprise inspections in casual attire had become his signature method for understanding how his properties truly operated when management believed no one important was watching. The evening rain had dampened his simple jeans and sweater, making him look more like a working professional than the billionaire CEO whose vision and strategic thinking had revolutionized luxury hospitality through authentic service and genuine respect for every guest regardless of their background or apparent wealth. The Grandmont's marble facade gleamed under spotlights that cost more than most people's annual salaries, its entrance designed to intimidate as much as welcome, creating artificial barriers between those deemed worthy of luxury and those whose presence might somehow diminish the exclusive atmosphere that wealthy guests expected and paid premium prices to experience. Marcus observed the scene through the eyes of someone who understood hospitality from both sides, as a successful businessman who could afford any luxury, and as a black man who had experienced discrimination in spaces that judged worth by appearance rather than character or actual ability to pay. His empire had been built on the revolutionary concept that true luxury emerged from making every person feel valued and respected, not from creating elaborate barriers that separated the deserving from the unworthy based on superficial characteristics and social assumptions. The doormen flanked the entrance like sentries protecting fortress walls, their expensive uniforms and dismissive expressions revealing attitudes that contradicted everything Marcus had tried to instill throughout his organization. He had spent years training staff to recognize that dignity was everyone's birthright, that exceptional service meant treating each guest with respect regardless of their race, apparent wealth, or social status. Tonight's inspection would reveal whether those values had penetrated beyond corporate training sessions to become authentic organizational culture, or whether his ideals remained confined to policy manuals while prejudice and discrimination flourished in daily operations that he rarely witnessed firsthand. As Marcus approached the golden doors of his own establishment, he felt the familiar mixture of anticipation and anxiety that accompanied these undercover visits. Each inspection revealed truths about human nature and organizational culture that couldn't be discovered through scheduled visits or formal reports, showing him whether his company truly embodied the values he preached or merely performed them when leadership was visibly present. The doorman's assessment of his appearance began immediately, eyes scanning from his wet hair to his simple clothing with the kind of calculation that reduced human beings to economic potential and social acceptability. Marcus recognized the look. He had encountered it countless times before becoming wealthy, and understood that tonight would test whether his success had created an organization that transcended such petty prejudices or merely provided him with insulation from experiencing them personally. The first doorman's response to Marcus's approach was immediate and telling, his body language shifting to create subtle barriers that communicated rejection without words. "Excuse me," the uniformed man said with barely concealed disdain, his tone carrying the kind of authority that came from years of determining who belonged in spaces of privilege and who should be redirected elsewhere. I'm going to need to see your room key or dinner reservation before you can enter. The request was delivered with assumption that Marcus couldn't possibly be a legitimate guest, his appearance triggering prejudices that had been carefully trained but never fully eliminated despite corporate policies and diversity training sessions that promised equal treatment for all visitors regardless of their race or apparent economic status. Marcus maintained his composure despite the familiar sting of discrimination, understanding that this moment represented exactly the kind of test that revealed organizational character beneath surface politeness and professional training. "I don't have a reservation," he replied calmly, his voice carrying dignity that refused to be diminished by shabby treatment. "I was hoping to speak with your manager about possibly booking a room." His response was reasonable and polite, yet the doorman's reaction revealed assumptions that had nothing to do with availability or standard procedures and everything to do with racial bias that determined who deserved consideration and who could be dismissed without consequence or second thought. The second doorman joined the interaction with reinforcement that made clear this wasn't individual prejudice, but systemic problem that had infected his organization despite years of explicit training and policies designed to prevent exactly this kind of discriminatory treatment. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to move along," he said with increased authority, his words carrying threat of escalation that suggested Marcus's mere presence represented problem to be solved rather than potential guest to be welcomed. "This is a 5-star establishment with certain standards, and we can't have people loitering around the entrance." The implication was clear. Marcus's appearance marked him as someone who didn't belong, whose presence somehow threatened the exclusive atmosphere that wealthy guests expected and paid premium prices to maintain. The conversation escalated quickly as Marcus's attempts to explain his legitimate interest in the hotel were met with increasing hostility and assumptions about his motives, character, and right to occupy space in front of his own property. Security was called, their arrival creating spectacle that drew attention from passing pedestrians and hotel guests who witnessed the scene with mixture of curiosity, discomfort, and tacit approval for barriers that protected their privilege from intrusion by those deemed unworthy. Marcus found himself being physically escorted away from the entrance of the Grand Mont, his ownership of the property rendered irrelevant by staff who had reduced him to stereotype that justified their discriminatory treatment while revealing the fundamental failure of his organization to embody the values he had worked years to instill. 15 minutes after being humiliated outside his own hotel, Marcus returned wearing his usual business attire, a custom-tailored suit that cost more than most people's monthly salaries, Italian leather shoes that gleamed under the entrance lights, and the confident bearing of someone accustomed to commanding respect through visible markers of wealth and success. The transformation was immediate and devastating in its implications, revealing how completely his staff's treatment of guests depended on superficial assessments rather than fundamental respect for human dignity. The same doorman who had rejected him minutes earlier now rushed to open doors and offer assistance, their behavior shifting so dramatically that it exposed the hollow nature of their professionalism and the prejudiced foundation upon which their service standards were actually built. The hotel manager, James Peterson, greeted Marcus with effusive welcome that would have been appropriate for visiting royalty, his attention focused entirely on ensuring the satisfaction of someone he now recognized as worthy of exceptional treatment based solely on appearance and assumed economic status. "Mr. Sterling," he exclaimed with surprise and pleasure, completely unaware that he was welcoming the same person his staff had just ejected from the premises for having the audacity to exist in their space while appearing insufficiently wealthy. "What an unexpected pleasure to see you here tonight. How can we make your visit exceptional?" The irony of the question was lost on Peterson, whose definition of exceptional service clearly didn't extend to people who looked like Marcus had looked 15 minutes earlier. Marcus's response was measured but pointed, his years of business experience having taught him the value of gathering complete information before making decisions that would affect hundreds of employees and thousands of future guests. "I'm here to understand how my hotel treats potential guests," he said quietly, his words carrying weight that Peterson couldn't yet interpret. "I'd like to speak with everyone who was working the entrance this evening, along with the security team that was called to handle a situation outside." His request was framed as standard operational inquiry rather than investigation into discriminatory practices, but his tone suggested something significant had occurred that required immediate attention and comprehensive explanation. The gathering of staff in the hotel's private meeting room created tension that revealed how completely unaware they were of the magnitude of their failure, both in terms of basic human decency and business practice that had potentially cost the organization credibility, legal liability, and alignment with stated values. Marcus listened to their accounts of the evening's events with growing anger that remained carefully controlled, understanding that their casual dismissal of legitimate concerns and their continued justification of discriminatory treatment represented systemic problems that extended far beyond individual prejudice to encompass organizational culture that had failed to internalize the principles he had worked years to establish throughout his company. Marcus's revelation of his identity created silence so profound it seemed to stop time itself, each staff member processing the magnitude of their error while understanding that their treatment of him represented not just personal failure, but institutional breakdown that contradicted everything their organization claimed to represent. "I am Marcus Sterling," he said quietly, his words carrying weight that transformed the meeting room from routine staff discussion to moment of reckoning that would reshape careers and organizational culture. "I own this hotel, and 15 minutes ago, your team refused me entry based solely on my appearance." The simplicity of his statement belied its devastating implications, revealing how completely appearance-based judgments had corrupted their service standards and professional obligations. The immediate responses revealed character in ways that annual performance reviews never could, with some staff members offering genuine apologies that acknowledged the seriousness of their actions, while others attempted justifications that demonstrated continued failure to understand the fundamental problem with discriminatory treatment based on racial prejudice and economic assumptions. Peterson's attempt to minimize the incident as misunderstanding rather than systematic discrimination exposed leadership failure that had allowed such attitudes to flourish despite corporate policies and training programs designed to prevent exactly this kind of treatment. His response revealed that the organization's commitment to equality existed primarily in marketing materials and legal compliance rather than authentic operational culture. Marcus's questions about training protocols, hiring practices, and performance standards revealed gaps between stated organizational values and actual behavioral expectations that had created an environment where prejudice could operate unchecked as long as it remained subtle enough to avoid legal consequences. The staff's responses showed how discrimination had been normalized through informal networks that reinforced prejudicial attitudes while providing cover through claims of maintaining standards and protecting the hotel's exclusive reputation. Their justifications revealed the sophisticated ways that racism operated in professional settings, hidden behind language of quality control and customer preference that allowed prejudice to flourish while maintaining plausible deniability. If stories of justice and accountability in the face of discrimination move you, subscribe now so you never miss these powerful tales of leaders who refuse to accept prejudice in any form. The scope of the problem became clear as Marcus reviewed security footage and staff communications that revealed patterns of discriminatory treatment extending far beyond his own experience to encompass systematic exclusion of guests based on racial profiling and economic assumptions that violated both company policy and basic human decency. The evidence showed that his experience wasn't an isolated incident, but representative of organizational culture that had failed to internalize values of respect and inclusion despite years of explicit training and policy development designed to create authentic equality in service delivery and guest treatment. Marcus's decision was swift and comprehensive, reflecting understanding that superficial changes couldn't address systematic problems that required complete cultural transformation, beginning with leadership changes that would signal organizations' commitment to authentic rather than performative equality. Effective immediately, everyone involved in tonight's incident is terminated, he announced, his voice carrying finality that left no room for negotiation or appeal. This includes the doorman, security staff, and any manager who was aware of the situation and failed to intervene. His words were accompanied by immediate action that demonstrated commitment to consequences that matched the seriousness of violations that had betrayed everything his organization claimed to represent. The terminations extended beyond immediate participants to include supervisors and managers whose oversight had allowed discriminatory culture to flourish unchecked, their leadership failure contributing to systematic problems that required comprehensive response rather than symbolic gestures that might satisfy public relations concerns while leaving underlying attitudes unchanged. Peterson's dismissal was accompanied by detailed explanation of how his response to the incident had revealed fundamental unfitness for leadership in an organization committed to equality and respect for all guests regardless of their appearance or presumed economic status. The scope of changes reflected Marcus's understanding that lasting transformation required addressing both individual accountability and systematic reforms that would prevent similar failures in the future. The immediate hiring of new leadership team reflected Marcus's commitment to finding individuals whose personal values aligned with organizational commitments to equality and inclusion, their backgrounds and experiences providing authentic foundation for cultural change rather than merely compliance with legal requirements and public relations necessities. The new management structure included diversity and inclusion specialists whose authority extended beyond advisory roles to encompass operational oversight that could identify and address discriminatory patterns before they became embedded in organizational culture and daily practices that shaped guest experiences and employee behavior. Training programs were completely redesigned to move beyond legal compliance toward authentic cultural transformation that addressed unconscious bias, systematic discrimination, and the sophisticated ways that prejudice operated in professional settings where surface politeness could mask deeper problems with respect and inclusion. The new programs included accountability measures that connected employee performance evaluations and advancement opportunities to demonstrated commitment to equality and inclusion, creating professional incentives for behavioral change that extended beyond mere compliance to encompass authentic transformation of attitudes and practices. This incredible moment of accountability and transformation shows us that true leadership requires the courage to confront discrimination wherever it appears, no matter how uncomfortable or costly the necessary changes might be. If you believe in the power of standing up for justice and creating real equality, hit that subscribe button and share this story with someone who needs to remember that authentic change requires action, not just words. 6 months later, the Grandmont had become model for inclusive hospitality that attracted guests specifically because of its reputation for treating every person with dignity and respect regardless of their background or appearance. The cultural transformation was measurable through guest satisfaction scores, employee retention rates, and industry recognition that acknowledged the hotel's success in creating authentic equality rather than merely avoiding legal liability or public relations problems. New staff were recruited specifically for their commitment to inclusive service, their training focused on recognizing and respecting human dignity rather than simply following procedures that might mask underlying prejudices and discriminatory attitudes. Marcus's experience had catalyzed changes throughout his entire hotel chain, with similar reviews and reforms implemented at properties worldwide to ensure that his organization's commitment to equality extended beyond individual locations to encompass systematic cultural change that honored stated values through consistent operational practices. The company's reputation for inclusive excellence attracted customers who valued authentic equality, creating competitive advantage that proved discrimination was not only morally wrong, but economically counterproductive in marketplace that increasingly demanded authentic commitment to diversity and inclusion rather than superficial compliance with legal requirements. The story of Marcus's experience became case study in business schools and hospitality training programs. Its lessons about systematic discrimination and transformational leadership influencing industry standards and practices that extended far beyond individual organizations to encompass broader cultural change in service industries. The incident had revealed how easily prejudice could operate in professional settings despite policies and training designed to prevent discrimination, while also demonstrating that authentic leadership required courage to confront uncomfortable truths and implement comprehensive changes that addressed root causes rather than merely treating symptoms. Most importantly, the Grandmont's transformation had created ripple effects throughout the hospitality industry, inspiring other organizations to examine their own practices and cultural assumptions while demonstrating that inclusive excellence was achievable when leadership committed to authentic change rather than superficial compliance. The hotel's success proved that treating every person with dignity and respect wasn't just moral imperative but business strategy that created sustainable competitive advantage in marketplace that increasingly valued authentic equality over exclusive privilege that separated worthy from unworthy based on prejudicial assumptions and systematic discrimination. Marcus Sterling's experience became a turning point that proved authentic equality requires more than policies and training. It demands leaders willing to experience discrimination firsthand and respond with transformational courage rather than comfortable denial. His story reminds us that true hospitality, like genuine respect, cannot be performed only when convenient. It must be embedded so deeply in organizational culture that it operates consistently regardless of who is watching or what someone appears to be able to afford. In a world where discrimination often hides behind professional smiles and corporate policies, what might change if more leaders had the courage to experience their own organizations through the eyes of those they claim to serve equally? If you stayed until the end of this incredible story, comment, "True leadership demands authentic equality," below to show you witnessed this complete journey of accountability and transformation.